All right, in this lesson, we're going to go over generally accepted auditing standards, or we call GAAS. Now, GAAS is kind of like GAAP, except GAAP is extensive in nature, and GAAS is not as extensive at all. It's really 10 standards to know. Okay. Now we're going to start off with understanding with GAAS, and then I'm going to give you a notation about this lesson. So if you're starting this lesson, make sure you get to the notation part so you can understand whether or not this is as relevant as it needs to be in your studies. Okay. So generally accepted auditing standards are divided into three different types of standards. So they're divided into three standards: general standards, standards of field work, and standards of reporting. So the way that I like to look at this is the general standards would be standards on the overall audit itself. Are we meeting these general standards on the entire audit in itself? So from beginning to end. Standard of field work is what type of standards do we have to comply with in the field when we're doing actual testing and field work to get to the answer of what we're going to be issuing an opinion of. And then the standard of reporting is the actual reporting process for both the entity and the auditor. What standards do we need to follow when we are preparing the financial statements and the opinion to those financial statements? So general standards, things that we need to think about for the entire audit. Standard of field work, the part of the field work where we're actually doing testing and the actual being out in the field and doing that work. And then the standard of reporting is what does the reporting look like? What standards do we need to follow when we are just about done with the audit itself? Okay. Now here is what general accepted auditing standards tells us. This is the minimum standard of care a CPA has to show in order for the CPA to show it has done its job in performing an audit to the standards, and there are 10 of them. So what that means is if I was going to go to you and say, how do I know that you did the audit to the standards? Okay, well, you would need to satisfy all these standards. Another way to look at it is if someone comes to you and says, how do I know that you actually did the audit appropriately? If you did and followed all of these 10 standards, it would be assumed that that is the minimum level of care that you performed in preparing that audit, and you did it to standard. So really it comes to, how do I know that you actually did the audit without negligence in some way or shape or form? How do we know? If you did all of these, then you wouldn't necessarily be negligent. Now, the way that you approach it may be negligent, but if you did all of these and you were not negligent, then you're good, okay? Then you've done the audit to the standard, okay? So let's look. One note about all of this is that this has been adopted by the PCAOB. So this was actually prior to the PCAOB. PCAOB adopted GAAS, but they replaced it with a more descriptive and comprehensive model, and we'll go over that in the next lecture. So then you might say, well, if the PCAOB has redone GAAS, why are we learning GAAS now? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One of the reasons why we're learning GAAS now, even though it may not be as applicable to the PCAOB, is because it's still used on the private side of the house. Another reason why we still look at GAAS to help us understand what's going on is because it's actually easier from a top-level view of summarizing what is on the more comprehensive PCAOB. So when I look at the PCAOB side and then I look at the 10 GAAS, I get a better understanding of the PCAOB side when I look at these 10 things, because it goes in kind of chronological order. Once I understand these 10 things, then I can go over and look at the PCAOB's standard for minimum care, and you'll notice that a lot of these things will be in it. It will be popped out better, and it will be more descriptive in nature. So although maybe this is not necessarily what is used when we think of GAAS for the purposes of PCAOB, this actually does lend us a little bit of an idea of better understanding what they wrote at the end of the day. So this, I think, is like the Cliff Notes version, and then the PCAOB side is more of the elongated, giving a broad overview of what you need to do in order to be considered meeting the standard for performing an audit. Okay, so there are 10 standards. I'm going to go through all 10. Now we take those 10 and we divide them into these 3 different standard areas. And the first one is general standards. So general standard number 1 tells you that you must have adequate training and proficiency as an auditor to do the audit. Well, that makes sense. If I'm going to be auditing a company, I better have the training to be able to do that and proficiency to tackle that case. Now, the one thing that the standard didn't say is that you had to have it before you started the audit. You actually don't need to have it before the start of your audit. You can actually learn as you do the audit, okay? But you have to have the proficiency to be able to do that. If, for instance, I was in a manufacturing client and then I had to go over to a farming client, I might not necessarily know how the farming client works, but I know the processes to getting to that audit for that farming client, and so I might be able to learn it on the way to doing that. Now, if I'm grossly improficient on it, then maybe I shouldn't be taking on that audit. I don't have the right adequate training or proficiency as an auditor. Now, the next standard tells us that we have to be independent of the client, both fact and appearance. Now, some would say that, hey, it's fact, not necessarily appearance. But in this day of age, it's got to be both fact and appearance. What do we mean by fact and appearance? Well, you have to be actually independent of your client, so you can't actually own stock in them or have relatives in high positions there, or you have to be independent of them in fact, but I think you need to be also independent in appearance too. Appearance means you cannot be seeming like you have a relationship with that other entity, okay? So if you're always caught at a event with them, cozy up together, that's not independent in appearance, even though it might be independent in fact. And then number 3, overall, during the entire audit, we need to exercise due professional care. Well, that's obvious, right? Exercising due professional care, skepticism, professional skepticism in what I'm doing, and making sure that I don't take everything for granted in what I'm being given from the client. Then we move into the standard of field work. These are things that we have to understand that we need to do in order to have that minimum level of care when performing the audit. Adequately plan and supervise any assistance properly. So we need to adequately plan the audit, and then we need to supervise all the assistants that are on the engagement, okay, at all times. Internal controls are obtained, evaluated to determine the extent, timing, and nature of tests. So we must gather internal control information and use that to help us understand the nature, timing, and extent to our testings that we're going to be doing in the audit. And then so we need to get a sufficient appropriate audit evidence. Well, that's obvious, right? If we're going to write an opinion on the client, we need to get sufficient appropriate audit evidence. The question is how much or how many items do we need to look at? That is where number 5 comes back into play. We need to look at internal controls. If they have really good internal controls, then we can say that we might need to take less evidence. If they don't have any good internal controls, then we need more evidence. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about internal controls in another section. Then finally, we have the 4 standards of reporting. Number 7, accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. So when we report, the financial statements must be in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. So they must be under US GAAP. Number 8, if we have any consistency issues from year to year, we need to state them as a disclosure in the financial statement, and we may put that in our opinion later on as well. Okay, so if there's any consistency issues from year to year, we need to disclose them on the financial statement so users are not surprised by why did this look like this one year and then it's totally different in another year. Number 9, include all disclosures. So that goes with a little bit number 8. Include all disclosures so there's no missing disclosures from there. And then number 10, express an opinion. Once we're done all of our work, then we need to express an opinion on what we have done. Okay? So this is a really quick lesson on GAAS, understanding that we might not necessarily use it for PCAOB purposes anymore, but it does give you a great overview, an easy way to think about the standards that are put upon us by the PCAOB. So 10, GAAS, adequate training and proficiency as an auditor. dependent of the client in both fact and appearance. We need to exercise due professional care on the entire audit. When we look at testing and field work and all the work that we're going to be doing, we need to adequately plan and supervise any assistance properly. Then we need to make sure that internal controls are obtained and evaluated to determine the extent, timing, and nature of the test that we're going to perform. When do we perform those tests? We perform those tests during the audit, and when we do that, we need sufficient appropriate audit evidence. If we don't have sufficient appropriate audit evidence, then we need to get more evidence or find another way to test the same thing. Once we've done that and we're ready to report, we need to make sure that the financial statements are in accordance with US GAAP, that there's no consistency issues. If they are, we need to disclose them. We need to include all disclosures, so we're not omitting disclosures that should be on the financial statement. And then we need to express an opinion based on our audit field work that we've done for the client. So this lesson is all about US GAAS and how to understand US GAAS from the perspective of what CPAs must do to be told that they've done what they needed to do in their audit. Hey, thanks for watching my video. If you like what you saw, make sure you press the thumbs up button that's right below here. If you have any questions, make sure that you leave a comment or that question in the comment box below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you press the subscribe button. It's just below me. Hey, if you want more videos like this, make sure you go to www.patrickleemsa.com to see more videos like this, or if you just want to learn more about accounting. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.